You people never learn, do you? The words cut clean through the glass-walled office, not loud, not shouted, but sharp enough to stop 30 conversations mid-sentence as keyboards went still and the low hum of the HVAC suddenly felt too loud, too exposed. Ava Brooks didn't look up right away, her fingers still resting on the edge of a financial report. The paper slightly bent where she had been reviewing numbers no one had asked her to check. Numbers no one else had even noticed. But across the room, Daniel Whitmore stood tall, in his tailored navy suit, one hand loosely holding a folder, the other tucked in his pocket like the outcome was already decided. And then he let the folder fall, not thrown, not slammed, just released, and it landed against Ava's desk, sliding until the papers spilled onto the floor at her feet. A few employees shifted in their seats. One cleared his throat. Another looked down at her screen pretending to read something urgent. But no one spoke. No one moved. Ava finally lifted her eyes, calm, steady, meeting Daniel's gaze for half a second before lowering them again as she stepped back from her chair and crouched down, gathering the scattered pages one by one. The fluorescent lights reflecting faintly off the polished floor, catching the slight tremor in her fingers that she quickly stilled. This report, Daniel continued, voice measured, almost bored, was due at 9 a.m. It's now 9:17. If you can't handle basic expectations, you shouldn't be here. A pause stretched, thin and uncomfortable, and somewhere near the back, a chair creaked as someone shifted their weight. Ava stacked the papers neatly, aligning the corners with quiet precision before placing them back on the desk. Her voice, when it came soft but clear, "I'll fix it." Not defensive, not apologetic, just factual, like a statement of intent rather than a plea. Daniel gave a small, dismissive nod, already turning away, already done, his attention moving to someone else, something else, as if she had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience in an otherwise efficient morning. The room slowly exhaled, keyboards resumed their tapping, screens flickered with spreadsheets and emails, and the moment dissolved into routine. But Ava remained standing for a second longer, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the desk, eyes lingering on a single line in the report that no one else had questioned, a number slightly off, buried deep in columns of projections, subtle enough to pass unnoticed, dangerous enough to matter. She picked up the pen beside her keyboard and circled it once, small, deliberate, then sat down without another word, her posture straight, her expression unreadable, while across the office Daniel's voice rose again, confident, controlled, filling the space with authority, and no one, not even him, realized that the quiet employee he had just dismissed had already seen something that could change everything. The number did not move, not when the spreadsheet refreshed, not when the system recalculated projections across 3 linked sheets. It just sat there, quiet and wrong, a decimal buried in a $12 million forecast that no one else had flagged, and Ava Brooks stared at it without blinking, her fingers hovering above the keyboard as the office noise returned around her like nothing had happened. Somewhere behind her, Daniel Whitmore was speaking again, confident, steady, outlining quarterly targets with the kind of certainty that made people nod even when they did not fully understand. But Ava's world had narrowed to that single line, that one misplaced liability shift that turned profit into risk if left untouched. She clicked once, then again, pulling up the source file, tracing the formula backward through layers of references, each cell leading to another, deeper, more complex, until the structure revealed itself not as a simple mistake, but something more dangerous. A misalignment that could trigger cascading losses within 72 hours if the report moved forward as is. Her breath slowed, controlled, as she leaned closer to the screen, the cool glow reflecting in her eyes. And for a moment she glanced up, scanning the room, wondering if anyone else had seen it, if anyone else understood what was about to happen. But all she saw were heads down, people typing, coffee cups half full, normal, routine, unaware. She looked toward Daniel briefly, his back to her now, his posture relaxed, assured, a man who believed everything was under control. And then she looked back at the screen. She could leave it. She could do exactly what was asked of her and nothing more. Submit the report, let it pass through the system untouched, and when the numbers failed, when the contracts collapsed, when the board started asking questions, it would not trace back to her. She was temporary, replaceable, invisible, by design. and no one would expect her to catch something this deep. Her fingers lowered slowly onto the keys, then stopped again, hovering, hesitation flickering for just a second before fading. "I will fix it," she had said, and the words settled in her chest with quiet weight, not because of him, not because of the way he had looked at her or the tone he had used, but because she had seen the truth in the numbers, and once seen, it could not be ignored. She exhaled softly and began rewriting the formula line by line, adjusting references, recalculating risk exposure, her movements precise, efficient, as if her hands remembered something her job title did not reflect. Minutes passed, then an hour, the office gradually shifting toward midday rhythm, conversations rising and falling, footsteps crossing the polished floor, but Ava remained still, anchored to the screen, the faint tapping of her keyboard blending into the background. A manager walked past her desk, glanced briefly at her monitor, then kept going, not recognizing what he was seeing, not realizing the correction unfolding in real time. Ava paused once more when the system flagged a conflict, a warning box blinking red in the corner, and she read it carefully, eyes narrowing, before overriding it with a steady click, confirming the change. The numbers shifted, subtly at first, then clearly, the error dissolving into alignment, the projection stabilizing as if nothing had ever been wrong, and she leaned back slightly, not in relief, but in quiet confirmation. Around her, nothing changed, no alarms, no announcements, no recognition, just the same steady hum of a company moving forward, unaware that it had just been pulled back from the edge by the one person no one had been watching. By late afternoon, the office light had shifted, no longer sharp white, but softened through the tall glass windows, casting long reflections across desks and polished floors, and Ava Brooks remained at her station, her screen now clean, stable, the corrected numbers quietly integrated into the system as if they had always belonged there. No trace of the error left behind, no visible sign that anything had ever been wrong. Yet something in the air had changed, subtle, almost imperceptible, like a frequency just slightly off. It started with a pause, not loud, not obvious, just a delay in the rhythm of the floor when a senior analyst named Kevin stopped mid-step near the central workstation, his eyes narrowing at his tablet as he refreshed the live financial dashboard. Once, then again, his brow tightening as he compared the current projections to the archived version from earlier that morning. "That is strange," he murmured under his breath, not loud enough to draw attention, but enough for the analyst beside him to glance over, curiosity flickering. Kevin tapped through layers of data, drilling down, tracing the adjustment backward, his posture shifting from casual to alert, and within minutes he was walking faster, heading toward the glass conference room, where Daniel Whitmore stood reviewing figures with two directors. Ava noticed the movement without turning her head, only the slight change in footsteps, the quicker pace, the difference in tone when Kevin knocked once and stepped inside without waiting. The door closed, muffling voices, but through the glass walls the body language was clear. Daniel straightened, the directors leaned in, and Kevin pointed to the screen, explaining, outlining, something unexpected, something not matching the earlier report. Inside the room, Daniel's expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough, his confidence tightening into focus as he took the tablet, scanning the updated numbers, his jaw setting slightly as he flipped between versions, comparing timestamps, searching for the source of the change. Outside, the office slowed again, attention drifting toward the room in quiet waves, people pretending to work while watching reflections in the glass, waiting for a reaction, for a signal. Ava kept her eyes on her monitor, her hands resting still now, her work complete, her presence unchanged, just another employee at a desk. Yet the system behind the scenes told a different story, one that was beginning to surface. Inside the conference room, Kevin pointed again, this time to the audit trail, a small line of text that recorded the modification, time-stamped at 11:52 a.m., and Daniel's eyes followed it, reading carefully, then reading again, the room falling quieter as the realization edged closer. He tapped the screen once, enlarging the detail, and the name appeared, simple, unassuming, not one he had expected to see, not one that matched the level of correction he was now looking at. Outside, a faint ripple moved through the office as someone noticed Daniel step back slightly, His posture no longer relaxed, his gaze fixed on that single line of data, while Ava remained still, the glow of her screen reflecting softly across her face, calm, composed, as the truth moved through the system toward him, steady and unavoidable. The name stayed on the screen longer than it should have, not because the system lagged, but because Daniel Whitmore did not move, his eyes fixed on that single line in the audit trail, as if reading it again might change it, might reveal a mistake, but it did not. It remained clear, time-stamped, precise, and undeniably hers. Inside the conference room, the air tightened, Kevin standing still now, no longer explaining, just waiting, while the two directors exchanged a quick glance that carried more weight than words, a silent shift from assumption to realization. Daniel lowered the tablet slightly, his fingers still wrapped around its edge, and for the first time that day his posture lost its effortless certainty, replaced by something quieter, something more controlled, as if recalculating not numbers but judgment. Outside, the office pretended not to watch, but eyes flickered toward the glass, reflections catching movement, tension moving in small, contained waves. Ava Brooks did not look up, her screen unchanged, her desk exactly as it had been, a pen aligned with the edge, a report stacked neatly, nothing signaling what had already unfolded, nothing asking for recognition. The conference room door opened without announcement, not abrupt, just deliberate, and Daniel stepped out, his gaze sweeping once across the floor, not searching randomly but narrowing, focusing, until it landed on her. For a second, just a second, the room felt like it paused again, the same way it had that morning. But different now, heavier, more aware. He walked toward her, not fast, not slow, each step measured, the sound of his shoes soft against the floor, yet somehow louder than before. A few employees shifted in their seats. One pretended to adjust a monitor, another suddenly found interest in a coffee cup, but no one spoke. Ava sensed him before she saw him, the subtle change in space, the quiet displacement of attention, and she lifted her eyes just as he reached her desk. Up close, the details were sharper, the faint crease between his brows, the controlled set of his jaw, the way he held the tablet not as authority but as evidence. "Did you make this adjustment?" he asked, his voice lower than earlier, stripped of the edge it carried before, but not yet softened, not yet fully changed. Ava met his gaze steadily, not defiant, not hesitant, just present, and nodded once. Yes. The word simple, unembellished. A pause followed, not long, but deep, filled with everything unsaid, everything recalculating in real time. Daniel glanced down at the tablet, then back at her, as if aligning the person in front of him with the data he had just seen, the correction, the precision, the impact. "Do you understand what you corrected?" he asked, and this time there was something different beneath the question, not doubt, not accusation, but uncertainty, the first crack in a certainty he had carried all day. Ava's answer came just as calm, just as direct, a liability misalignment. That would have shifted $12.4 million of exposure onto our side within 3 days. And the number settled between them, specific, undeniable, echoing slightly in the quiet that followed. Around them, the office held its breath again, not because of volume, but because of truth, because the moment had shifted, because the balance had moved, and Daniel Whitmore, for the first time that day, did not immediately respond, his silence saying more than anything he had said before. The number did not echo loudly, but it settled into the room like something solid, something that could not be ignored. $12.4 million, precise, measured, and real, and Daniel Whitmore felt it before he responded, the weight of it pressing against the assumptions he had carried just hours earlier. His fingers tightened slightly around the tablet, then loosened, as if adjusting to a new balance he had not prepared for. And for a moment, he looked at Ava Brooks not as a role, not as a title, but as the source of something he had nearly missed. Around them, the office held still in that quiet, observant way, people pretending to focus on screens while listening to every word, every pause. Daniel exhaled slowly, controlled, then asked, "Why did you not escalate this?" The question calm on the surface, but carrying something deeper beneath it, something that sounded less like authority and more like uncertainty. Ava did not look away, her posture steady, her voice even. Because the report was already scheduled to move forward and escalation would have delayed the correction, she paused briefly, just enough for the logic to settle, and delay would have increased exposure. Her words were not defensive, not explanatory in tone, just factual, like the numbers she had been working with. Daniel's gaze shifted for a fraction of a second, processing, recalibrating, the timeline, the decision, the outcome, all aligning in a way that did not match the narrative he had built earlier that morning. A faint sound came from behind him as one of the directors stepped out of the conference room, drawn by the silence more than the conversation. But he did not interrupt, just stood there, listening. Daniel looked back at the tablet, scrolling once, then stopping again at the audit trail, the timestamp unchanged, the name unchanged, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its earlier sharpness entirely. You corrected this alone? Ava nodded once. Yes. No emphasis, no attempt to elevate the action, just confirmation. Another pause followed, longer this time, stretching across the space between them, and in that pause something subtle shifted, not loud, not visible, but real, the kind of shift that changes how a room feels without anyone announcing it. Daniel lowered the tablet to his side, no longer needing to reference it, because the truth was no longer on the screen, it was standing in front of him, calm, composed, and completely unaligned with the judgment he had made earlier. He glanced briefly around the office, catching a few eyes before they quickly looked away, and then returned his attention to Ava, his expression no longer dismissive, no longer certain, but searching, as if trying to understand something he had overlooked. How long have you been working with financial risk models? He asked, the question quieter now, more careful. Ava's answer came without hesitation, long enough to recognize. When something does not belong, she did not elaborate, did not offer credentials or history, just the truth in its simplest form. The director behind Daniel shifted slightly, exchanging a look with Kevin, both of them now fully aware of what had happened, of who had prevented it, and of how close it had been. The office remained silent, but the silence had changed, no longer empty, no longer passive. It carried awareness now, recognition beginning to form, and Daniel Whitmore stood in the center of it, no longer the only one in control of the moment, no longer the one defining what mattered, because the balance had already moved, quietly, precisely, and there was no way to move it back. The silence did not break all at once, it loosened slowly, like a room adjusting to a new temperature, and Ava Brooks felt it without looking up, the shift in breathing, the subtle change in how people moved around her, no longer ignoring, no longer dismissing, just aware. Daniel Whitmore remained standing by her desk a second longer than necessary, as if the moment required something more from him, something he had not prepared to give, and when he finally spoke again, his voice was different, not just quieter, but measured in a way that suggested he was choosing each word carefully. Walk me through it, he said, not a command this time. Not sharp, but steady, almost level with her. Ava paused, then turned slightly toward her screen, tapping a key to bring the corrected model back into view. The numbers aligning cleanly across the columns, no red flags, no warnings, just structure restored. She pointed once, precise. The original model shifted liability weighting here. Her finger moved across the screen without touching it, tracing the logic. It looked balanced, but the timing offset caused exposure to stack on our side after 72 hours. Her tone remained calm, consistent, as if she were explaining something routine rather than something that could have destabilized the company. Daniel leaned in slightly, not invading her space, but close enough to see the details, his attention fixed now, fully engaged, the earlier distance gone. Around them, a few employees leaned subtly in their chairs, pretending to work but listening. The quiet of the office now focused, intentional. Ava continued. I recalibrated the timing alignment and adjusted the reference chain so the exposure distributes correctly. She tapped once more, bringing up the before and after comparison. This version holds under stress scenarios. She did not look at him when she said it. She did not need to. Daniel's eyes moved across the screen, following the changes, the clarity of the correction undeniable. And for a moment he said nothing, his silence no longer dismissive, but reflective. Behind him, Kevin stepped closer, unable to stay back any longer, his voice low but unmistakably impressed. She is right. This would have hit us hard by the end of the week. The director beside him nodded once, confirming without elaboration. Daniel straightened slowly, the tablet now resting loosely at his side, no longer his. A source of control, just an object in his hand. And he looked at Ava again. Really looked this time, as if seeing her for the first time without assumption layered over perception. Why are you in a temporary role? He asked, the question direct but no longer edged, more curious than critical. Ava's expression did not change, but there was a slight pause before she answered, not hesitation, just a choice. Because it pays what I need right now. Simple, contained, offering no more than necessary. The answer lingered between them, not incomplete, but not fully open either, and Daniel seemed to recognize that, his gaze shifting briefly, acknowledging the boundary without pressing further, the office around them resumed a softer rhythm, not fully returning to normal, but moving forward, people typing again, phones lighting up, yet the attention remained, quiet and steady. Daniel nodded once, small but real. Good work. The words not loud, not performative, just spoken, and for a second the weight of them settled differently than anything he had said earlier that day. Ava did not react outwardly, just a slight shift of her hand back to the keyboard, her posture unchanged, as if the acknowledgement did not alter what had already been done. Daniel turned then, taking a step away, but not with the same certainty as before, his movement slower, more considered, as if carrying something with him now, something heavier than authority, something closer to realization, while behind him the office continued to watch, not openly, not dramatically, but enough to understand that something had changed, and that it had changed because of the one person no one had been watching before. The words, good work, did not echo. They settled, quiet and understated, yet they lingered longer than anything else that had been said that day, and Ava Brooks felt them without reacting, her fingers already returning to the keyboard, resuming motion as if nothing had changed, as if the moment had already passed. But around her, it had not. The shift remained, subtle but undeniable. The way conversations resumed with a lower tone, the way glances now lasted a fraction longer when they passed. Her desk, no longer dismissive, no longer indifferent, just aware. Daniel Whitmore moved back toward the glass conference room, his steps slower than before, his posture still composed, but carrying something new, something less rigid. And as he entered, Kevin followed, the door closing behind them with a soft click that seemed louder in the quiet. Inside, the discussion resumed, but the rhythm was different, no longer flowing from assumption, now anchored in something real, something that had almost been missed. Ava did not turn to watch. She did not need to. The reflection in the glass was enough, shapes moving, hands gesturing, heads nodding. But the energy had changed, and she could feel it in the air, like a current running just beneath the surface. Minutes passed, then more, the office gradually returning to its steady hum, phones lighting up, emails sent, footsteps crossing the floor, yet the awareness remained, quiet and constant. A junior analyst approached her desk hesitantly, stopping just short as if unsure whether to speak, then finally asking in a low voice, "How did you even catch that?" The question carried curiosity, not challenge, and Ava glanced up briefly, her answer simple. It did. Not a line. She offered nothing more, no explanation beyond what mattered, and the analyst nodded slowly, as if trying to understand something that could not be fully explained in words, then stepped back, leaving her to her work. Inside the conference room, Daniel stood near the screen, listening as Kevin outlined the implications again, but his attention drifted, not away from the conversation, but deeper into it, connecting pieces, replaying the morning in his mind, the tone he had used, the assumption he had made, the dismissal that now felt misplaced. He glanced once toward the glass wall, toward the open floor beyond it, and his eyes found her again, seated, focused, unchanged, and for a brief moment he held that gaze, not long enough for anyone else to notice, but long enough for something to settle inside him. He looked away, returning to the discussion, but the shift remained. When the meeting ended, the directors filed out first, their expressions thoughtful, their earlier confidence tempered by what they had just seen, and Kevin paused at the doorway, giving Ava a small nod as he passed. Not exaggerated, not performative, just acknowledgement. Daniel stepped out last, the tablet now tucked under his arm. No longer a shield, no longer a symbol, just something he carried. And he did not stop this time, did not return to her desk, but as he walked past, his pace slowed for a fraction of a second, just enough to notice her again, just enough to recognize that the balance in the room had shifted in a way that could not be undone. Ava continued typing, the soft rhythm of her keystroke steady, consistent, unaffected by the movement around her, and as the day moved forward, the office settled into a new normal, one where nothing was said out loud, but everything had changed just enough for it to be felt. The afternoon light began to fade into a softer gray, stretching long across the office floor, and with it came a different kind of quiet, not the tense silence from earlier, but something more reflective, more aware, as if the building itself had absorbed what happened and was still adjusting. Ava Brooks remained at her desk, posture steady, her screen filled with clean data, stable projections, everything aligned exactly as it should be. And yet her eyes were no longer moving as quickly, her hands pausing between keystrokes, not from uncertainty, but from something else, something heavier than numbers. She glanced briefly at the clock in the corner of her monitor, 5:12 p.m., later than she had planned to stay, but leaving now felt incomplete, like walking away from a sentence that had not fully settled. Across the office, a few desks had already emptied, chairs pushed in, screens dark, while others lingered. Employees finishing tasks with quieter focus than usual, a soft vibration from her phone broke the rhythm, subtle but persistent, and she reached into her bag, pulling it out just enough to see the notification, a medical billing reminder. Overdue? The amount sitting there in bold numbers that did not move, did not adjust, no matter how carefully she looked at it. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a second before she locked it again, slipping it back into her bag without expression, her face returning to its calm surface, but her shoulders settling just slightly, just enough to reveal the weight she carried beyond the office. She turned back to her screen, pulling up another file, not because it was urgent, but because movement felt easier than stillness. Behind the glass wall, Daniel Whitmore stood alone in the conference room now, the others gone, the large screen dimmed to a faint reflection of the city skyline behind him, and in that reflection, he could see the office floor, smaller, quieter, and one desk in particular that seemed to hold his attention without effort. He rested one hand on the table, the other, holding the tablet loosely, no longer reading from it, just holding it, as if it represented something he had not fully processed yet. His gaze drifted again toward Ava, not sharply, not obviously, just enough to confirm she was still there, still working, still exactly where he had left her earlier, and for a moment he did not move, as if deciding something that required more than instinct. He walked out of the conference room slowly, the door closing behind him with a soft sound that barely registered, and crossed the floor without the earlier certainty, each step quieter, more deliberate. Ava noticed the movement again, the same shift in space, the same subtle change in attention, and she looked up just as he approached, their eyes meeting briefly before she straightened slightly, not defensive, not expectant, just present. Daniel stopped at her desk, not immediately speaking, the pause stretching just enough to feel intentional. And then he said, "Are you staying late because of this project?" His voice even, neutral, but carrying a different kind of weight now, something closer to consideration than authority. Ava glanced at her screen, then back at him, her answer simple, "I am staying because I need to." And the words landed quietly, not asking for understanding, not offering explanation, just truth. Daniel held her gaze for a moment longer than before, as if the answer meant more than it revealed, and in that moment, the distance between them was no longer defined by position or title, but by something else, something unspoken, something that had started to shift but had not yet fully settled. The answer did not explain everything, but it explained enough, and Daniel Whitmore felt it in the way the words settled, quiet and firm, not defensive, not seeking approval, just stated. And for a moment he did not respond, his gaze shifting briefly to the screen in front of her, rows of data moving steadily under her hands, then back to her face, composed, controlled, carrying something he had not noticed before. The office had thinned out further now, the distant hum of printers gone. Most lights dimmed to a softer glow, leaving only a handful of desks still active, their screens casting pale reflections across the glass walls. And in that quieter space, the conversation between them seemed more exposed, more real. Daniel glanced toward the hallway, then back again, as if weighing something, then asked, "Do you have a moment?" The question simple, but the tone different, no longer assuming, no longer commanding, and Ava hesitated just slightly, not out of reluctance, but out of calculation, before nodding once and saving her work with a quick keystroke. She stood, smoothing the edge of her sleeve without thinking, and followed him across the floor, their footsteps softer now in the near-empty space, the distance between desks more noticeable without the usual noise. They entered the conference room, the city lights beginning to glow beyond the windows, reflections layering glass over glass, and Daniel closed the door behind them, not abruptly, just enough to create a boundary. For a second, neither of them spoke, the room holding a different kind of silence, not tense, but deliberate, and Daniel set the tablet on the table, no longer needing it between them. "Earlier today," he began, his voice measured, slower than usual, "I made an assumption." He did not rush the sentence, did not soften it, just stated it, and the words hung there, unfinished but clear. Ava remained standing, her posture steady, her hands loosely at her sides, listening without interrupting, without filling the space. Daniel continued, "And that assumption was wrong." The admission was simple, but it carried weight, not because it was loud, but because it was rare, and he did not look away when he said it, his gaze steady, direct, as if choosing not to avoid it. Ava absorbed the words without visible reaction, no shift in expression, no immediate response, just a slight breath in, then out, as if acknowledging the moment without needing to define it. Outside the glass, the office moved quietly, one employee packing a bag, another shutting down a computer, the world continuing in small, ordinary motions, while inside the room something less visible but more significant settled into place. Daniel glanced briefly toward the window, the reflection catching his own image layered over the city lights, then back to her. "You should not be in a temporary position," he said, not as a question, not as an offer yet, but as a statement that carried both recognition and reconsideration. Ava's eyes shifted slightly, not surprised, but attentive, as if she had expected something like this, but not exactly when or how it would come, and she answered carefully, "I am where I need to be right now." The same calm tone, the same controlled honesty, offering just enough truth to stand without opening more than she chose to. Daniel nodded slowly, taking in the answer, not dismissing it, not pushing past it, just acknowledging that there was more beneath it than was being said. And for the first time that day, the conversation between them was not defined by hierarchy or correction, but by something quieter, something more balanced, something that neither of them named, but both of them understood had begun to change. The room held the silence a second longer after her answer, not tense, not uncomfortable, but deliberate, as if both of them understood that whatever came next would matter more than what had already been said. Daniel Whitmore shifted his weight slightly, his hand resting against the edge of the table, the city lights behind him now fully visible through the glass, small points of brightness scattered across the darkening skyline. And for a moment he looked past her, past the room, as if aligning his thoughts with something larger than the immediate conversation. When he spoke again, his voice carried a steadiness that was different from earlier in the day, less about control, more about decision. "There is a senior analyst position opening next quarter," he said, not presenting it as an offer yet, but placing it into the space between them, measured and intentional. "It requires exactly the kind of precision you demonstrated today." His gaze returned to her, direct, but no longer weighted with assumption, just recognition. Ava Brooks did not respond immediately, her eyes lowering slightly, as if considering not the opportunity itself, but the timing of it, the implications that came with it, and the things it would require her to change. Outside the room, the office had nearly emptied now, the last few employees gathering their belongings, the faint sound of a cleaning cart somewhere down the hall, distant and rhythmic, marking the end of the workday. Inside, the air remained still, focused, as Ava finally lifted her gaze again. Next quarter is not soon enough, she said quietly, not dismissive, not ungrateful, just honest. And the words settled with a different kind of weight than anything. Before them, Daniel's expression shifted slightly, not in disagreement, but in recognition of the urgency beneath her statement, something that had not been visible earlier, something he had not considered. "What do you need now?" he asked, the question simple, but carrying a level of directness that left little room for deflection. Ava held his gaze for a second longer this time, as if deciding how much to say, how much to reveal, and then answered, "Consistency." The word alone, but filled with meaning, steady work, reliable income, something that did not shift without warning. Daniel nodded slowly, processing not just the word, but everything it implied, the context he had begun to understand without being told explicitly. He turned slightly, walking a step toward the window, the reflection catching both of them now in the glass, standing in the same frame, no longer separated by distance or position in the same way as before. Temporary roles do not offer that, he said, more to himself than to her, the realization forming as he spoke it. Ava did not respond, her silence not empty, but allowing the thought to settle where it needed to. Daniel turned back, his posture more resolved. Now, the hesitation gone, replaced by something clearer. "Then we adjust the timeline," he said. The decision quiet but firm, not announced, not dramatized, just stated as fact. Ava's expression remained calm, but there was a slight shift in her eyes, not surprise, not relief, but attention, as if the moment had reached a point where it required her to consider something beyond the immediate. The city lights flickered in the background, reflections moving subtly across the glass, and for a second, neither of them spoke, the room holding the weight of what had just been set into motion, something that extended beyond a single correction, beyond a single day, something that was beginning to reshape not just her position, but his understanding of it. The words settled between them with a quiet finality, not loud, not dramatic, but firm enough to shift the direction of everything that followed. And Ava Brooks felt it in the stillness that came after, the kind of stillness that did not ask for an immediate answer, only for honesty. She looked at Daniel Whitmore for a moment longer than before, her gaze steady, searching not for reassurance, but for consistency. The one thing she had named, the one thing that mattered more than titles or recognition. Outside the glass, the last of the office lights dimmed further, a custodian's cart rolling slowly past the hallway, the faint sound of wheels marking time in a way that felt quieter than usual, more deliberate. Ava took a slow breath, not visible, just enough to settle her thoughts, and then she spoke. Adjusting the timeline does not change the structure. Her voice calm, measured, not rejecting his decision, but clarifying its limits. Temporary becomes something else only when it is defined clearly. The words were simple, but they carried weight, not challenging, not confrontational, just precise, like the numbers she had corrected earlier. Daniel listened without interruption, his posture still, his attention fully present, and for a second he nodded slightly, acknowledging not just the statement, but the reasoning behind it. He stepped closer to the table, resting both hands lightly against its edge, grounding himself in the moment, and when he spoke again, his tone carried a level of clarity that had not been there before. "Then it will be defined clearly," he said, not as a promise made lightly, but as a decision already forming into action, effective immediately, not next quarter. The adjustment came without hesitation this time, the timeline no longer abstract, no longer distant. Ava did not respond right away, her eyes shifting briefly to the reflection in the glass, where both of them stood, in the same frame, no longer separated by distance in the way they had been earlier that day, and then back to him, her expression unchanged on the surface, but with something deeper moving beneath it, something closer to consideration than acceptance. "Clarity includes stability," she added quietly, not pushing, not testing, just ensuring that what was being offered aligned with what was needed. Daniel nodded again, slower this time, understanding the implication. "It will be a permanent position," he said, the words direct, unambiguous, leaving no space for interpretation. "Full-time, with the compensation and structure that matches the responsibility you have already demonstrated." He did not elaborate further, did not add qualifiers, just placed the offer into the space between them as something complete. The room held the weight of it, not heavy, but significant. The kind of moment that changes direction without raising its voice. Ava let the silence sit for a second, then another, her thoughts moving through everything the offer represented, not just the role, but the shift it required, the stability it promised, the trust it implied. She looked at him again, her gaze steady, and nodded once, small but real, not exaggerated, not immediate enthusiasm, just agreement grounded in understanding. Daniel exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if releasing something he had been holding since earlier that morning, something that had shifted but not yet settled until now. Outside, the city lights continued to flicker, reflections moving across the glass, and inside the room, the distance between them had changed, not erased, but redefined, no longer based on assumption or hierarchy, but on something quieter, something earned, something that had taken shape over the course of a single day and now stood clearly where it had not existed before. The nod was small, almost easy to miss, but it carried more weight than anything spoken before it, and Ava Brooks felt that weight settle into place, not as relief, not as triumph, but as something steadier, something earned, and for a moment neither of them moved, the decision standing quietly between them like a line drawn without needing to be announced. Daniel Whitmore straightened slightly, not returning to his earlier posture, but adjusting into something more grounded, more aware, as if the space he occupied now required a different kind of presence, and he gave a short, deliberate nod in return, acknowledging not just her agreement, but the path that had led to it. Outside the conference room, the last overhead lights dimmed further, leaving only the glow from computer screens and the distant shimmer of the city, reflections layering softly across the glass, blending interior and exterior into something almost seamless. Ava turned slightly toward the table, reaching for the edge with her fingertips, grounding herself in the moment, then releasing it as she stepped back, her movements calm, unhurried, as if the outcome did not need to be rushed to feel real. Daniel picked up the tablet again, but this time he did not look at it, instead setting it aside after a brief glance, no longer relying on it to frame the conversation, no longer needing it as proof of what had already been understood. Human resources will formalize it first thing in the morning, he said. The words practical, structured, but quieter than his usual tone, as if aware that the process mattered less than the shift that had already taken place. Ava nodded once more, not questioning, not pressing, just accepting the next step as part of a larger sequence that had already been set in motion. The door opened gently as they stepped out into the office, the air outside cooler, emptier now, most desks dark, chairs pushed in, the day fully winding down. A few remaining employees glanced up, briefly, their eyes moving between Ava and Daniel with subtle curiosity, not intrusive, just aware that something had changed without needing to know exactly what. Ava returned to her desk, her movements the same as before, setting her bag down, closing out the last file on her screen, the soft click of the keyboard marking the end of her workday, and for a moment she paused, her hand resting on the mouse, her gaze drifting across the screen where the corrected numbers still held steady, clean, balanced, exactly as they should be. Daniel remained standing a few steps away, not interrupting, not directing, just observing quietly, his attention no longer carrying the weight of authority, but something closer to recognition. Ava shut down the system, the screen fading to black, and in that brief reflection, she saw both herself and the space around her. The office no longer the same as it had been that morning, not because anything physical had changed, but because something unseen had shifted beneath it. She picked up her bag, adjusting the strap over her shoulder, and turned toward the exit, her steps steady, unhurried, the same measured pace she had carried all day. As she passed Daniel, their eyes met once more, not long, not dramatic, just enough to acknowledge what had been said and what had not, and then she continued toward the door, leaving behind the quiet office, the glass walls, the reflections, and the version of the day that had started with assumption and ended with something entirely different. Daniel remained where he was for a second longer, watching her walk away, not with regret, not exactly, but with a clarity that had not been there before, the kind that comes only after something has been understood too late to prevent, but just in time to change what comes next. The door closed behind her with a soft click that barely echoed, but it marked the end of something more than a workday. And Ava Brooks stepped into the cooler air of the evening without looking back, her pace steady, her shoulders relaxed in a way they had not been that morning. The city stretching out in front of her with its usual rhythm, headlights moving in long lines, distant horns blending into the background. Everything continuing as it always did, yet something inside her had shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to feel. She walked past the glass exterior of the building, its surface reflecting her silhouette alongside the lights behind her, a quiet reminder of where she had just been and what had changed inside those walls. And for a moment she slowed, just slightly, as if letting the reflection settle before continuing forward. Upstairs, Daniel Whitmore remained in the office. Longer than planned, the space now nearly empty, the last of the cleaning staff moving quietly through the far hallway, their presence subtle, unobtrusive, while he stood near the window, looking out at the same city but seeing it differently, his reflection layered over the skyline in a way that made it impossible to separate the two. His mind moved back through the day, not in fragments, but in a clear sequence, the words he had used, the tone he had carried, the assumptions he had made. Without question, and the moment those assumptions had shifted, not because he chose to change them, but because someone else had shown him something he had failed to see. He exhaled slowly, his hand resting against the cool glass, the surface grounding, real, and for the first time that day there was no urgency in his posture, no immediate task pulling his attention forward, just the quiet weight of recognition settling into place. He turned from the window and walked back toward the conference table, the tablet still where he had left it, untouched, unnecessary now, and he picked it up only to set it aside again. A small motion that reflected a larger shift, one that could not be undone. The office lights dimmed further, leaving only the ambient glow from the city and the faint reflections of empty desks, chairs aligned neatly, everything in order, yet different in a way that could not be measured. Outside, Ava reached the corner of the block, her steps unhurried, her phone still silent in her bag, the earlier notification not gone, not resolved, but no longer carrying the same weight it had before, because something else now stood beside it, something more stable, something that would not disappear overnight. She paused at the crosswalk as the signal changed, the red light reflecting faintly on the pavement, and for a second she looked up, not at anything specific, just at the open space above the street, the quiet between passing sounds, the kind of moment that did not ask for words. The light shifted, and she moved forward again, blending into the flow of the city, one step at a time, her presence steady, grounded, unchanged in the ways that mattered most. Back inside the building, Daniel stood alone in the fading light, his gaze no longer searching for answers, but holding on to something simpler, something clearer, the understanding that what he had overlooked was never hidden, never complicated, just unseen because he had not been looking for it. He did not speak the thought out loud, did not write it down, but it settled into him all the same, quiet and certain, shaping what would come next without needing to announce itself. And in that silence, with the city moving beyond the glass and the office finally still, the truth remained, simple and undeniable. She had not changed the system. She had simply revealed what it should have been all along, and that was enough to change everything.